or became chair for about years. So it's been quite a while. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, what brought me here, mainly because it'll give you some insight into how I approach design and graphic design and what my interests are. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions about the program, where it's going, where it's been, any questions you might have lingering in the back of your mind. But I can also answer questions about design and field design, as much of it as I know, etc. So, let's see. So I'm originally from the Midwest. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up on a horse farm, which we only had one horse, but we boarded horses for other people. So there was like about 9 horses and about 13 acres. So I grew up kind of in a rural area. I went to Ohio State University, and my first major was aerospace engineering. So I'm fairly good at math, fairly good at science. I thought, well, if you're good at math and science, you become an engineer. My dad's an engineer. My younger brother's an engineer, and so I also started off that way. I found engineering to be very boring. And so after about a year of that, I'm like, what I really wanted to do was some sort of kind of art creative thing. So I wrote the news to my parents, who were paying for my tuition, that I was switching to an art degree. That did not thrill them at all. But I figured if I'm gonna, I tried this idea of being an engineer. I was like, oh, I'll make a lot of money. I can do art on the side, but it is so annoying. Doing something that you aren't engaged in is not, unless you're in really poor straits, it's not worth the money. So I switched to art. I ended up getting a degree in drawing, painting, and printmaking. And that was in 1995, I believe. So yeah, a while ago. And when I was in my senior seminar for that, just before I was graduating, we had a visiting artist, and she was like, well, yeah, if you want to make some money, you should learn Quark Express, because if you can do some layout, you can get a ton of temporary work doing graphic design. And I didn't even know about graphic design at that point. And you guys probably aren't familiar with Quark Express, but it was the layout program before InDesign, and it was like a monopoly figure within the designing field. Like, you had to know Quark Express if you wanted to do anything, any print production, etc. It was, I don't know, maybe the equivalent of Microsoft. I'm trying to think of something. Within its sphere, it was like the Google of layout programs. They were totally like, what's the term? They kind of sat on their laurels. They didn't take feedback from the people that used the program. It was very esoteric, like, how do I do this? And it wasn't at all intuitive. So eventually, Adobe, who only had Photoshop and Illustrator at this time, boy, I sound like a person, only had Adobe and only Photoshop and Illustrator at that time, and said, oh, let's make a layout program and see how we do. And so eventually, everybody switched over to InDesign, disappeared, etc. But anyway, so I heard, okay, if I learn this program, then I can make some money. Because after I graduated with my art degree, I ended up waiting tables and tending bar for a while. And then I decided to go back to school and get a second bachelor's in graphic design. And this wasn't, it wasn't only because, it gave me more job opportunities. I learned a lot as an art student. There was a lot of exploration and learning of mediums that I think really helped me as a graphic designer. But it also didn't answer all my questions. I was really curious as a student about what made something interesting to look at. What was, like, how could you teach me to make something that is like aesthetically pleasing kind of thing? And there was some theory and stuff like that, but there wasn't a lot of kind of like in depth. I almost wanted to take engineering to art, right? And so then when I started graphic design, I started to get some of that, right? I started learning a little bit more about layout and, you know, hierarchy and how we organize space and how I use the space. And so that was, felt really good. It's like, oh, I'm putting these two things together, working really well. So this was probably, you know, I was going to University of Cincinnati at this point, which has a really good design school. And I did that for 2 years. And one of my professors said, you know what, you're getting your second bachelor's. It's going to be another 2 years before you graduate. You'd be much better off, you know, getting your master's somewhere. And I said, so that makes sense to me, but where should I go? And so he recommended me to a couple schools. I applied to Cranbrook, I applied to Yale, and I applied to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. And luckily I got into RISD, and I ended up getting my master's there in graphic design. So I never finished my degree at the University of Cincinnati, but I got my master's in graphic design. One of the things that's really nice about RISD, and we've had some of our students go there and for their master's too. So if you're interested in going to master's school, I get your master's, and you can come to chat with me, or I can come to another GRIDS and we can talk about, you know, why you wanted to get your master's, what's the advantage of it. Or maybe you can ask me later today, you know. But anyway, one of the nice things about RISD was it's very open. Like if you have an interest and you wanted to follow that interest, you could take the classes you needed to, like, oh yeah. If you were interested in typography and wanted to design type, you could do that. If you're interested in color and learning all you can about color theory, you can do that. I was still interested in what makes something visually interesting. And so RISD's kind of partnered with Brown University. They're both in Providence, Rhode Island. So I ended up taking some philosophy courses in aesthetics and taking some courses in semiotics, which I'll mention in a second. And that was the first time where I'm like, oh, this is really what I was interested in, right? Like, what really the theoretical underpinnings of why, if I want to make a poster, how do I make it grab people's attention? I want to make a tax form. How do I do it in a way that is visually interesting, etc. So if I'm designing an interface for phone, etc. And so I was able to kind of answer those questions for myself. I graduated in '99, I believe. And then I ended up working in Providence for a while with one of my professors. Ended up working at Northeastern University as a graphic designer. I met this woman who was one of the writers who worked on a recurring project I had. Eventually we started dating. I always knew, well, I shouldn't say I always knew I wanted to teach. I always enjoyed being on college campuses. I like the fact that I can go over to the library over there. I mean, this means a little less when you can just search on anything on Google, but the idea I can go over to the library and just kind of wander through the stacks and be like, oh, look, there's a book here, a book here. And I just really like kind of that kind of environment, right? So it's like, oh, you know, if I become a teacher, then I can spend all my time on campus and, you know, talking to people. People are interested in asking questions, interested in discussing things, etc. When I met my wife, Alexis, I said, hey, I'm applying to teach, and I have job opportunities. I think they were in Dayton, Ohio, which I'm from Ohio. So I believe the other one was in Idaho, and then the other one was in Sacramento, California. And my wife's from Rhode Island, and she's a big beach person. She's like, oh, Sacramento, it has to be Sacramento. So fine, we moved out to Sacramento. At this point, I think we had been dating for like 3 months. And I totally would, this is the stupidest thing probably I've ever done. And I would not recommend anybody else doing this. But, you know, we decided to move across country and live together. We had not left to live together at that point. And we just like, sure, why not? Let's do it. And so we moved out here, we moved to Sacramento. We ended up, let's see, I think for 9 years we lived together before we got married. And we were like, yeah, we're fine. Yeah. And if I tell it too much. in the end, she was a freelance writer at that point, and she did a lot of work for UC Davis, but she also ended up doing work for Cisco, the technology company, which is a big Fortune 500. A big company, but she was working as a contractor, so she didn't get any healthcare. This was pre-Obamacare. So I'm like, well, I get great healthcare here. If you want to get married, you can be on my healthcare kind of thing. And that's the romantic proposal that evolved to us getting married about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Pretty much. I mean, it really didn't change our day-to-day living, right? Because again, we were kind of the thing, if we didn't like spending time with each other, then we were going to break up anyway, and it didn't really matter if that meant getting divorced or not getting divorced. We just go to each other's company, so we're going to keep doing it until we don't. Yeah, so it's not the most romantic story in the world. And we accidentally got married on the same day my brother got married to his wife. We didn't realize that. And then, so now our anniversary is on the same day. So it's actually next week. Well, that's kind of part of the story. Next Tuesday is our anniversary, and almost every year we forget about it. And then my sister-in-law emails us and says, "Happy anniversary!" And I'm like, "Oh yeah!" And we look at each other like, "Happy anniversary!" So yeah, so we do tons of stuff together. Love each other to death, but yeah, the whole kind of marriage thing wasn't a big deal. Anyway, came out here. Started teaching, thought, be in Sacramento for a while. It's a nice place, but might move on somewhere else eventually. Nope. I mean, if you're interested in teaching, it's a really nice place to do it because it's a teaching first institution, right? And so it's all about you guys, and it is there's enough room to kind of do it with curriculum. Things that you find interesting and engaging. So that was 22 years ago. At first, I was the one. So at first, I had to teach the typography class a lot, and coming from art, I really felt insecure about my typography. And when I was at RISD, people were like, "If you want to know typography, you read Bringhurst." Bringhurst is basically the Bible of typographic information. And so I had to I read that a couple times. It's become one of the, so when I was teaching it, that became a book here that students bought and learned from. If for some reason you had to drop out of school and do something else, but you wanted to be a graphic designer still, Bringhurst, Robert Bringhurst, Elements of Typographic Style is the book to get. It will let you know what people expect when they say good typography. It doesn't mean you have to do what he says in there, but it will let you know what kind of like, oh, this is what people consider to be good typography. And if you want to do something else, go for it. We'll even say in the book, like, I'm just giving you the guidelines, you do whatever you want. But it's a good way to know when you are kind of going outside of the normal bounds and when you. So I ended up teaching the typography class over and over again. I really enjoyed it. I'm one of the few instructors that was taught when I was a student how to design type. So I've also taught a class on designing type in the past, which maybe we'll do as an elective sometime again in the future. So if you're at all interested in designing a typeface, it's something you might be able to work out. Yeah, so I will say kind of add some things that are more directly related to you guys. I think I was here about 5 or 6 years when we decided to become active. We had something like 750 graphic design majors trying to get through the program at one time. If you wanted to graduate with a graphic design degree, it was not unusual to take 6 years just because you couldn't get the classes because there weren't enough instructors, there weren't enough rooms, there weren't enough computer labs for everybody that wanted to do it. And so So it was taking everybody 6 years to get through, because it wasn't until your fifth or sixth year that you had enough units, had that many more units than everybody else, where you're first in line to get a class. And so until you got those units, you just like had to do all these other classes. So at one point we decided, you know what, it'd be better just to become impacted. And that way 40 students every year can get through in a fairly tight sequence. If you don't make it through the portfolio review the first time, you can wait a year and try again. Even then, if you don't get in the first time and you decide to try again the following year, that probably means you'll be here for 5 or 6 years. And that's the same amount of time people were putting in before everybody was putting in previously. So we feel like it's a good trade-off, though we have never found a perfect system. Like we always hope that the 40 students that get in are the 40 best students, but you know, nothing is perfect. So it's something we're always trying to tweak and figure out, okay, what's the best combination of grade point average and projects, and ways to weight those projects to kind of find 40 students that'll do really well. So we've been doing that for a while now. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we always had a spring show. We started to have alumni showing up and saying, hey, I'm getting asked to do this, you know, this interface design or this user experience design, right? You guys need to add that to your courses. And at that time it was me, Mario, John, and Mian. And none of us kind of had that as a student. So we said, okay, let's hire somebody, because you might not have ever met her. Gwen was an instructor here. She's like the person that created the graphic design program here. It didn't exist before Gwen Amos. Yeah, she took me on a tour of this place. I remember coming to this room 22 years ago, and she said, oh yeah, this used to be the home ec room. Like the reason it's set up the way it is there used to be all sorts of blenders and countertops in here. So that's why there's all sorts of sockets along the wall. And if you go into there, right, into the 166A, you can find all sorts of counters and cabinets, and there's a sink back home, there's a sink here. The fact there's a fridge here. All this stuff is because at one point this was a home economics kind of. So anyway, we looked for somebody to teach interface design, and we were lucky enough to get Lauren. And yeah, in my opinion, she's just great. I love working with her. So that was about 5 years ago. And then yeah, shortly after that, COVID happened. We went online. I think we did better than a lot of degrees online, but it was nice to get everybody back. And I know everybody, you know, there's a segment of students that really like taking classes online, but in my experience, it's much harder to be disciplined and do things with the focus that you would if you were like in person, and also getting like see what other people are doing. There's always a little bit of like, oh, let's see what my friend's doing over there. And it's like, oh wow, that's really nice. Maybe I can go back to my work and try to make it a little better kind of thing. And even if it's not true, like everybody thinks everybody else's stuff is better than theirs. And you know, half the time it's not the case. You're just used to looking at your own stuff, and you're like, you're extra critical of your own stuff. So yeah. All right, so that was a long disgorging of information. Happy to talk more, but anybody have any questions?
What do you think like one of the best works? Yeah.
You know, I have work, and maybe if I do this again next year, I'll bring pictures, because I used to have a lecture that I would give. And I should mention this to Tyler and the rest of the group. Like I'm happy to come back and give a lecture on semiotics if you want at some point. I can explain what that is, on aesthetics, or I can give you, if you want to see my work, I can come back and show you examples of my work. Because one of the things I always like to do as this professor, I would do either on the first or second day, is I would show my student work in the same time that same kind of projects you guys were doing. And you could, and what I had found, get kind of back to the story in a second, and I had found online that I think it was Michael Baruch. And so that name might be the famous graphic designer. at your stage in life, I knew no famous graphic designers, so if that name doesn't ring a bell to you, don't worry about it. But if you've ever seen the movie Helvetica, right, the documentary about typeface Helvetica, he's one of the guys that they interview repeatedly over and over again. Anyway, he went to the University of Cincinnati. He put his student portfolio up online maybe 15 years ago, and I happened to grab it and make a copy of it. So I have examples of his work going to the University of Cincinnati, which is the same place where I did my lower division work. And so in this presentation, I showed examples of like what I did as a student, what he did as a student, and the kind of assignments that we did. And it's very similar to the kind of assignments you guys are doing. And I would say, a third of your guys' work is as good or better than my work probably as a student. And so part of it is just to show everybody that like this really famous graphic designer, wasn't like a prodigy. And I'm not a prodigy by any means. But, with a little luck and a little, and some interest in what you're doing and engaging in what you're doing, you can, if you want to become a professor, you can become a professor. If you want to become a famous graphic designer, that could be you too. There's a lot. Now, to answer your question, favorite design, student project or professional project? Strange enough, I think one of my favorite professional projects was an early one that I actually did as a freelancer, and it wasn't like anything I had done as a student, and it was this huge brochure, really a catalog for a conference that I did, and it had something like, I'm guessing it probably had 100 sessions distributed over 3 days. We took a morning session and an afternoon session, and then I had to design, along with my friend, the layout of this catalog with this informational grid too, where you had to understand like, oh, on this day at this time, I can possibly take these things, and these things would cover these various types of information. Like, oh, this is a type of typography session and business session. And this over here is administrative and color or something like that. And so, it was. I'm looking back on it now because I have slides from these works. Back then, you had to have slides if you wanted a job. You would bring your slides to a potential employer, and they would check them. I was like, whoa, that looks really nice. And it's just pure information design, hierarchy, but there's something about it that kind of really interests me. Yeah.
What are the benefits of getting that?
Generally, the reason you don't get a master's in graphic design is if you want more money. In my opinion, there's 2 reasons to get a master's in graphic design, and this is borne out by. So when I went to RISD, there was 10 of us, right? And out of those 10, 2 of those 10 were people that were on the 3-year program. So normally it takes 2 years to get a master's. There were 3 years because their undergrads weren't in graphic design at all. And at least with RISD, they were happy to take people that were like, oh, my undergrad's in sculpture, or my undergrad is in English, right? And then they would teach them the basics of graphic design because they were more interested in, what kind of ideas they had. So half the people that I went to grad school with were older than me, and they had been in the design field for maybe, I could guess, somewhere between 6 and 10 years. And they had just reached the point where they had done everything they had kind of wanted to do. And they were doing, they've done, so many identities, so many other products, and they kind of wanted a break and wanted to kind of rethink things, right? And so going to grad school is a nice way to say, oh, okay, I've done a lot of things. I'm ready to kind of start a second stage to my career, but I want to take a second and do a deep dive. At that point, you know what you really like. When you guys graduate, you probably have a sense of what you want to do, but the problem is while you're in school, your instructors are telling you what projects you're going to do, right? So you're going to do this book project, you're going to do this poster project, et cetera, et cetera. After you're out for a couple of years, then you start realizing, oh, if I have a choice, I like leaning towards this kind of design or that kind of design, or you thought you would like this, turns out you don't. So one of the reasons to go get your master's is after you've been out in the field a little while and you need to kind of like reset and you want to explore something and see where it goes. Now, the only problem with that is often once you graduate and you're earning like a normal, adult salary, or like, oh, I don't have to live with somebody in a small apartment anymore. I have a nice place, and I haven't, I'm used to going out to eat and all this other stuff. When if you take a year or two to go to grad school, all of a sudden you're not making the same amount of money anymore. You might be freelancing a little bit, so you kind of have to go back to living like a student a little bit, and so that takes a little bit of like, I really want to live like a student. The other reason you go to get your master's is if you want to. So we have a lot of instructors, really good instructors who don't have their master's here, but they'll always be temporary instructors or lecturers. We've had people that have worked here for as long as I have, longer than I have, 22 years, as a part-time instructor, and that's worked great for them. But if you want to have a full-time job teaching when you need your master's, with graphic design, a master's is a terminal degree, so it's not like you have to go get your doctorate to teach graphic design. And then if you get to, if you get a teaching position, you get to spend all your time on campus, you get to work with a lot of interesting people. I love talking to students. I love working on projects with students. I know some instructors don't like doing the same projects over and over again, but I always do the exact same ones because if you give students enough flexibility, then they always bring like interesting ideas to the project. And so, we would do book design. I'd say just pick a book. So, everybody would pick books from all, huge spectrum of things, right? So I'm learning about all these books. I can remember somebody did Anna Karenina, and I hadn't read that yet. And I thought, I think I'm gonna read that. I read it, and now it's one of my favorite books. And so it's, So you like kind of the college life and the college atmosphere, the college vibe, teaching is a great profession. So yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the special project like you did for example, what did the students do last year?
Let me see if I can remember correctly. So the idea with the concept behind the special project, and I think we've been doing it for 2 years, maybe 3 years now, is that to try to give you guys something where you feel like some of you are such good students and you listen to your professor so well, that we're afraid that the professor's ideas is coming through your portfolio more than your own. So the idea was to create an assignment that you did on your own, so we could get a sense of your own kind of editing and your own kind of direction, and also give you freedom to kind of play with what interests you. So that the independent project has 2 parts. One that is very strict assignments about color, shape, size, all that stuff. Another one where you can choose anything you want, like video. You could do a comic if you wanted it. You could do a typical graphic design. It's totally fine too. So the idea is to see what you want to do. So the last 2 years, each year, the students will be given a word. You try to pick a word that is not super obvious. Like the worst thing you want to do is pick a word like dog and then end up with like 100 pictures of sketches of dogs, right? So I can't remember if we did nuance. I think maybe nuance was one of them. Yeah. And then another one was resilience. Yes. So trying to pick words that are a little abstract. And also, it's never 100. I'm also afraid students often think that it's 100% about, like a flashcard, like you hold up your design and the stranger off the street is going to say resilience. And that's never our intention, right? What we want to kind of see is what can you make that's visually interesting with resilience as the seed for that. So you guys are going to be given a word, and that will be a seed for a structured design project, and then you'll give an option to do a pretty open-ended.
I was just wondering if you were planning on teaching any electives in any of the semesters.
I'm hoping to eventually. The problem is we experimented with this a little bit, and at one point we had 2 electives, each that were 3 units, and one was on illustration. Because if you know Jonathan Weiss, he's a professional illustrator, and he taught a class on illustration. And then I taught a class on design systems where we designed a typeface and we designed a set of playing cards. The problem is that even if you guys were to like get rid of one of the classes you're currently taking, doing your 2 5-unit design classes and then adding 3 units of design on top of that is tremendously hard. Like half the people that sign up for the classes had to drop on like the first week or 2. Just like, I love the idea of taking this class, but we are so busy, it's just not going to happen. And even the people that stayed, and they did some good work, you know, half the time I'm like, okay, where's your homework? And they're like, fine, just try to do this or do that. Like I was pretty loose with the grading, all that stuff, because I know you guys are just have a ton to do. When we first became impacted, to tell you a little story, instead of 2 5-unit classes, students had 3 3-unit classes. So it used to be in the first year you would take 120, 122, and 125. There was 140, 142, and 145, right? And the problem was with then, even though there were only 3-unit classes, was the same thing. Like if each of those 3-unit classes each had you like doing one project and thinking about a second project, that means doing 3 projects at any one time, and thinking ahead to 3 other projects at the same time. And then you're all like trying to do your best you possibly can. And it was just constantly burnout. So we went to the 2 5-unit classes, try to give you a little less of this kind of multiple projects. So I know you still do multiple projects. But when we try to add these electives back on, then we end up back in the same spot. So I think my solution is, and unfortunately, I'm not sure I'll be able to get this into place for you guys, but you can give me feedback on this if you have thoughts. But instead of doing a 3-unit class, maybe doing a series of 2-unit classes that are very like one project for the whole class. Like so the class and the class would change. So maybe one semester we would offer it and I would teach type design for 2 units. Next semester maybe Jonathan would do illustration for 2 units. The year after that might be animation, porn or something for 2 units. If you took it 3 times, and that's 6 units at your elective, and half of you are coming from community college, you already have all your electives done, but you have 2 upper division electives that you're supposed to take care of. So in theory, if you took like one, again, it would be one project for those 2 units. If you tack that on, you could in theory either take it 3 times and get your upper division electives done, or if you just wanted to say like, okay, 2 units, I'll take it and just see what I can do with it. It wouldn't be too big of a commitment. So we're hoping to do that, and then I would be able to teach a class again, etc. I am open to doing some special projects with people who are interested in that. But again, it's a similar thing. You have to be kind of like, I've started with a lot of seniors, not a lot, but a fair number. Like next semester is not a good time for seniors to do it because you start off really excited, like, yes, I'm going to do this type design or this animation or whatever, and that works great for 7 weeks, and then you're like, shit, I have however many 8 more weeks, and then my portfolio is going to be seen by the entire world, and I have to go get a job, and so then everything gets like, oh, I'm going to work on my portfolio, and then the side project kind of like fades. And I would say half the time people still finish shit, but the other half it kind of fades away and never finishes. But if people are interested in a special product, come talk to me. We can probably work something out. They can be single unit, so special projects can be from 1 to 3 units. It would involve coming by my office hours like once a week, once every other week or something, showing me what you did and me saying, okay, looks good. I recommend these things and try doing this and come back next time. Kind of thing. Other questions, either about year, design in general?
Yeah, we got some questions on the Zoom.
Okay.
So I'm gonna kind of combine these two, but the first question is what is your advice to any designers that fail to get into the program? And the second part of it is if you don't make it into the program the first time, do you have to retake 25 and 30 to redo the projects for the portfolio?
So good questions. And I'm going to go into kind of an ongoing spiel about this. And if I forget to answer the specifics of those two, don't hesitate to call me back. If you don't get in, you have some options. And you have to decide what your priority is, right? You can wait a year and apply again. That means it's going to take another year longer to graduate. As I mentioned before, that's not totally unusual. Before we had Impaction, it would take 5 or 6 years to graduate. That's just how long it was. So this is going to take an extra year. Really, I guess the problem is it's an extra year and you're not guaranteed to actually get in at that point, right? So there is some pressure and obviously some big questions to ask. For you, when you guys submit your portfolios next semester, and I'm pointing in this direction because before we started, I think I had asked who hadn't become a major yet, and you have to put on a major. You guys are going to have to pick your classes for the fall semester before you find out whether or not you did, which can be a little daunting because what we ask you to do is pick classes as if you don't get in. So you need to think about, okay, if I don't go in and get in, what am I doing? Am I going to work on my GE for a year? If you're a transfer student, you probably have this done. Do you want to work on a minor for a year? Because you can get a minor in art, you can get a minor, I think, in communication studies. Do you want to change your major to design studies, work on it for a year, go ahead and take the portfolio review again, and then if you get in, you have to decide, well, I only have 1 year of design studies left, or I have 2 years of graphic design. So what do I want to do? So the big thing is you're going to be forced to you're going to have to be forced to think about a backup plan. Let me talk about that just briefly. The reason we asked you to select classes as if you don't get in is because if you do get in, we can put you in your graphic design classes, right? You just drop whatever class you previously signed up for. We can put you in the graphic design class, but we can't do the opposite. If you don't get in and graphic design is your class, and you have to drop graphic design, and then you're like, oh, I need to take a photography class, but that class is already full, so there's no options for you at that point. So you have to plan as if you don't get in, and then if you do, you'll drop your classes on Monday. I always forget, are the juniors Monday and Wednesday? Yeah. So then you'll drop your classes on Monday, Wednesday. We'll sign you up for graphic design classes on Monday, Wednesday, and then that's how it works. So if you don't get in and you're like, okay, I don't want to wait a year, I don't want to go to school for another 3 years because it's going to be wait a year and then 2 years of upward division. You can switch to another major. Design studies is the closest aligned major, but there's obviously some key differences. Design studies is a BA instead of a BFA. In general, in the job world, nobody cares whether it's a BA or a BFA. In this world of higher education, a BFA just means it's more units, right? So it takes more classes to graduate with a BFA than it takes to graduate with a BA. And so design studies is a BA, so it takes fewer classes to graduate with it. But design studies is a study of design. It's an academic study. Sometimes I say it is as art history is to art, design studies is to design, right? Art historians generally don't do art. Whether they do it on their own kind of thing at the side. They don't do it as a profession, right? Design studies majors, they study design and culture. It is very design adjacent. I wouldn't be surprised if a fair number of design studies students get jobs in the design field, either adjacent to design or working in design. Because in the end, this isn't really a secret. It's obvious. what gets you a job as a graphic designer is your portfolio. If you, there are plenty of famous graphic designers, like David Carson never went to design school a day in his life. He at this point, he's taught a lot of classes and he has a lot of honorary degrees. But if you have a great portfolio, people will hire you. You know, there might be some situations like if you want to work for the state of California, they're not going to be like, oh, you don't have a degree, fine, they'll still hire you. You'll have to get a degree. But in theory, if you have a great portfolio, you're going to get a job. The easiest way to get a great portfolio is to get a degree in graphic design and spend a lot of time as a student working on your projects over and over again. And that's the best way to, you know, that's your end goal is awesome portfolio. So design studies, you'll be spending a lot of time thinking about design, the relationship of design and culture. Could be that you're, excuse me, putting together a great design portfolio at the same time. But it's a different kind of field. If you're at all interested in running a gallery, working in a museum, design studies is great, you know, great degree to get. So, you know, of course, you could just go into photography, you could go into art if you don't get into graphic design, you could just go to the other side, you know, you could get an engineering degree. But yeah, there are some hard choices if you don't get in that first time, and you have to think about what you want to do, whether you want to try again. To get back to one of the questions is, okay, so you can't retake a class that you pass. So assuming you pass 25 and 30, you can't retake them the next year. So that means, but basically what you do is you rework the project you did. And you can literally take the same projects and just spend a year like, ooh, let me fix this up kind of thing. And you can show other people and say, hey, do you think this is better or worse than that, etc. Not all the professors, but I'm generally happy if you want to come to my office hours, say, I didn't get in, here's my original project, here's my new project, what do you think? And I'll be like, oh, yeah, I think you improved here, but I think you still need to work at this, etc. And you can come back and talk to me as long as I have time open in my office hours. So you can spend a year working on reworking the project. Now you could just say, oh, I didn't like that, what I did on that project at all, and redo it from the ground up, right, on your own, and that's fine too. A fair number of people don't do anything and they just submit the same projects again, which is not probably the best way to actually improve your chances of getting. But it's kind of up to you. I do feel like everybody, all the full-time instructors are willing to sit down with you and look at your portfolio and say what they think you can improve on. Now, we don't always agree 100%. We all have different ways we approach design. Hopefully, one of the things you learn here is you're like, oh, I love the way Young teaches the class, but maybe the way John teaches the class. Sorry, John, if you're listening to this. Is like, you're going to find instructors that are kind of your kind of niche. You're like, oh, yeah. And it could be none of the instructors are kind of your thing, and you'll learn your own thing, which you should. But all the instructors are willing to sit down with you and say, okay, this is where I think your portfolio could be stronger. Most of them don't have time to meet with you repeatedly. I'm happy to do it. Not that I have a lot of time, but I'm happy to do it if you want to. And then you resubmit those assignments. We generally try to create the portfolio in a way that if there is a dramatic change from one year to another, you keep that in mind, try to communicate to students who are resubmitting that, hey, you don't have this project because we changed graphic design 25 last year. So you submit this project instead of that project. You have a question related to portfolio review or a different thing?
It's a different thing.
Okay, 1 second. Is there, do you want to check in and see if that answered their question? Or
Yeah, we can take a look real quick. But I think that they captured pretty much everything that they wanted to know, specifically with like the 25 and 30 thing. So I think you got everything with that. So
all right, excellent. Go ahead then.
Oh, sorry. This is just like on average, but how many students apply every spring semester for the major?
We get for nowadays about mid-70s. There there was a while that we were getting over 100. To be honest, I'm happier. You know, I would not be heartbroken, so I'd be curious why it would happen. That if we only got 40 students and we just, I mean, they were all good students and 40 students applied, we'd be like, yes, 40 students in, so problem solved kind of thing. So other than the fact that might indicate that we aren't doing something as well as we used to, so I'm not upset that, oh, it's, you know, 70. I think there might be a semester pre-COVID where we had high 60s, I think. But there were times where it was 100, 110, etc. I think you know, more people, more programs across campus getting impacted. I think students are more aware of like, okay, do I want to take the chance that they're, you know, I don't get in, and you know, how much do I want to try and you know, have to worry about trying to get the grant.
What's the timeline between like submissions and we notify you?
It is, so it's changed over the years because we wanted more and more time to grade your stuff, so we're not rushed. Some of the faculty are very, so hopefully you assume this, but we take it very seriously, and we know that some people are going to get in, some people aren't. And again, as I mentioned before, it's not going to be perfect, and we feel really awful for the people that just almost get in, and then maybe somebody gets in, then decides, you know, it's not for them. It's like, oh, if we only. We take a lot of time on those, and so I think now we have it up to like 3 or 4 weeks between when you guys submit your portfolio digitally, and then you find out, I think the finals. I think it's just before spring show. I think it's the weekend before finals week. You'll find out, and then yeah, then you'll either have to change your, you know, what classes you have signed up for, or you'll be like, okay, I'm going to stick with these classes and just think about how you want to approach, you know, either resubmitting or finding.
And we have another question from the chat, which is, how do we build a portfolio without any clients yet?
You mean a portfolio for when you graduate Sac State for the spring show, or portfolio for portfolio review? I do both.
Yeah, I'll give it a second real quick, but assumedly it's for after college for.
Yeah, well, one, you can work as a freelancer. I think a lot of you have worked either for family or friends, or, you know, on your own. And so there's ways to work on your portfolio that way. I don't necessarily recommend doing that while you're a student, because remember, anything that takes away from your time on your projects, that could be lowering the quality of your portfolio, which in theory could affect your job. We don't live in a perfect world. In a perfect world, you would not need side jobs, you would not need all this other stuff going on in your life, and you could just spend the time that you're a student working on class projects, maybe having a little bit of a life. But it's always good to go back to this idea, like, okay, your portfolio is your best way to get the job you want after you graduate, or get the clients you want after you graduate. I don't necessarily recommend becoming a freelance graphic designer on your own after you graduate. There's a lot you still have to learn, but people do it, and some people do it well. Another kind of, I want to kind of come back to this and answer a little bit more, but it's worth going down this tangent that I've taken, I often take. But it's worth realizing that, so there's this saying out there, and I always forget who said it, that it takes 10,000 hours of doing something to become a master at it. And the original quote is from learning chess. Like, if you spend 10,000 hours learning chess, you'll be a master chess player, right? I thought that was interesting, and just for kicks one day, I was like, okay, let me figure out how many hours you guys spend doing graphic design while you're at school, assuming, including the time you're in class. So in theory, for every unit of class you take, you're doing so many hours outside of class, right? So this is kind of part of our accreditation. So I added up all that time, and roughly in 4 years, you put in about 5,000 hours working on graphic design. So that's 5,000 hours towards being your a master at it. Then I figured out, if you work about 40 hours a week, it takes about 4 or 5 years to put in the other 4 or 5,000. And when I talked to like alumni and stuff like that, the first couple of years you graduate, you still feel like have imposter syndrome. You feel like, okay, I really don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to try this and that. You're working hopefully for an art director. You're working with other graphic designers. But usually after 4 or 5 years, that's when you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I am a graphic designer, and I can solve these problems, and I can do this really well. And so, don't, on one level, you're going to learn a lot of stuff by the time you graduate. But there's a lot of stuff you're not going to know. And we have also tried having classes that teach a lot more about pre-production, like how to get your Pantone colors and your how to mark up things to get sent to printers, both digital printers and offset printers, and learning more about the printing process and all that. None of which I was taught as a student, but it does prepare you more as a professional. But again, going back to, you guys are already overworked, and there's not really a lot of time to fit other things in there. That isn't hit upon as much. But those are things you learn once you graduate. Once you graduate, you start as a beginning designer at some sort of company. You're going to learn how to deal with clients. You're going to learn how to do mock-ups. You're going to be the low person on the totem pole who's there at 9 o'clock the night before meeting, printing everything out and organizing everything and putting the things on the board for the client to see, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to just keep in mind, you're going to learn a lot those first couple of years out. It's not once you got your degree, like, oh, I got everything under my belt. All right, so back to this portfolio question. So your portfolio is going to communicate your sense of your skills at hierarchy, communication, etc. So if you were to just to say, I'm going to quit school and going to teach myself graphic design, one, you should buy Greenhurst, Elements of Typographic Style, and read it. So now you know all about type. And two, you're going to have to be very disciplined, and you have to be very self-critical and not be like, oh, this is my little baby. Nobody can talk badly about my design here, and get feedback from people, right? And then you will, correct that design. You don't have to have clients to do design projects, right? Sometimes just hearing about, like, you can go on the web and find out, oh, so-and-so did this design project. It could be a famous firm, it could be Pentagram, and they did design a logo for so-and-so. You can say, oh, you know what? I'm going to take that project on myself. I'm going to design a logo for this company, and I'm going to do the research, and I'm going to see what I would come up with if I had that. So, and then put that in your portfolio, right? Again, if it's only, so-so, or if it's pretty good, when you pitch it at a potential job interview, they might say, well, that's kind of, you did on your own, and that's kind of easy. But if it's amazing, which it's hard to do amazing, but maybe it's amazing, then they're going to be like, you know what, come work with us, kind of thing. So, yeah, your student work is a great way to get that first job. If you happen to get lucky enough to get an internship, that's a great way to learn a little bit of those extra stuff you learn the first couple of years outside of work. But yeah, and doing, there are places you can sign up for in order to do freelance work for nonprofits. So you can sign up, I can't remember the names now, but it shouldn't be hard to Google them, where you're like, oh, professionals do this too. You just say, hey, here's my skill set. Be honest about your experience, but say, and then a nonprofit organization will look on there for like, oh, we're looking for a designer to help us with something. You guys meet up, you guys talk, you figure out what the requirements and the time are. Other questions?
Are there like certain like qualifications or stuff we need to like qualify for it?
So there's two ways to think about internships. There is the internship that you get that is like 3 units, and there's a number of them on campus. And usually you hear about them through like some of the seniors already have those internships. You hear from them about like, oh yeah, I work. I think the name off the top of my head right now. The live, yeah, ASI, the lab, etc. And those are worth 3 units of if you sign up for the internship class. And generally, those only go to students that are in the upper division. So after you get through the portfolio. Now there are lots of other internships out there, and you have to be careful. So there are kind of going to what I was just saying. There are a lot of companies out there that will be like, you know what, you don't have a graphic designer on the staff, and we'll give a student a chance. So we'll pay you kind of like minimum wage. You can come and you can practice, and yeah, and that's a way for them to get some design kind of on the least expensive amount of money. But you're not really learning anything there, right? Because you know more than the people that hired you about design. And so for the classes we give 3 units for, you have to work for and work under a graphic designer or with other graphic designers. It can't be something where you're just getting coffee. It can't be something where you know more than everybody else around you. But if you're looking just to make a couple of bucks, and this company over here is like, hey, I need a graphic. We had somebody. Yeah, we had a student who was laying out, you know, in the Sunday paper they have like, they're not coupons, but there's like 1,000 little pictures of cars or something like that. I can't, like classified or something like that. He just spent all day in InDesign, like laying out, like it had nothing to do with hierarchy or skill or anything. But he earned a couple bucks, and he, you know, he got to practice InDesign.
So
And
suggest like I'm a third. Trying to get students to the program.
yeah.
What do you suggest or say in terms of like?
Well, until you get in, it's going to be difficult. But otherwise, I would just keep your ear to the ground. I'm trying to think. Usually, with I've already did this once earlier. I don't know if it's to Tyler or somebody else. If somebody comes to the department office with say, hey, you have somebody, student who can do this, I just pass it on to the GRIDS and say, hey, GRIDS, pass this along to, you know, the students, let them know this person is looking for. I think we had an instructor who was looking for, I get them all confused now, but there's 2 earlier this semester. So being in touch with GRIDS is a good way. Once you guys graduate, I know it's a little old school, but there is a alumni Facebook group, and as soon as you guys graduate, we give you invites to that group, and that's a way. And that group's really good because we'll have students instead of calling them not students. They've graduated like 10 years ago, and they'll get on there and say, "Hey, we're looking for a new intern, or looking for a new student, not student, just a recent graduate." And we love the people that come from Sac State, and you look us up, kind of thing. And so, or sometimes on the Facebook page, it's like, you know, I've never had to print a vinyl cut that we're going to put on the side of the wall. Does anybody have any recommendations for a company that does that? And somebody else will pop on and say, yeah, we do this all the time, and you can't talk to Joe over it, such and such. And it's a good way to kind of get information in the field. But as far as internships, yeah, listen to, I'll put anything I find, I'll distribute it to GRIDS, and otherwise, to kind of keep an ear out, ask around, kind of thing.
As far as that Facebook, Facebook, is that something you want to get added into if you like made the program and then graduated? Or?
Yeah, usually it is. And I'm not. I'll double check. It might have changed. It's been a while. But usually it's an alumni Facebook group. So.
And anything that he sends to us, so that we hear, we get some stuff from alumni too, or people that are recently moving on to the next jobs. We'll post that all into our Discord server. There's a channel called Opportunities. So we'll ping everyone. There'll be opportunity. It will have like ways that you can contact them, listing all the jobs and the job benefits and all that stuff, and link to apply. So if you're looking for one of those internships, we post pretty frequently. We get some, like, normally we get like 1 or 2 every like 2 or 3 weeks. So just be looking on our Discord, and we post them pretty consistently.
you mentioned about up the division, you talked about, up the division for graphic design requirements.
Yeah, so once you're, so once you pass the portfolio review, you're officially a graphic design major. And then you go, and then you take your first, typography classes here. And usually an internship is expecting you to have some basic typographic skills. So a lot of you coming from community colleges, you already take some sort of typography. So in theory, you could do these internships, but what you have in lower division is just the beginnings of your kind of typographic knowledge. So usually you're not a good fit for internship until basically your junior.
Yeah, it's already my third year here. I had to transfer out junior.
Yeah.
So yeah, they did say I would get my portfolio sometime next semester in the spring. So yeah, if I do get it, then that means I get my spot.
You have a chance. Yeah, we covered a little bit of this earlier. I realized it came in a little late, so not a big deal. But yeah, we get about 70, 75 people that apply, and only 40 go on the next thing. So only half the people make it. Other questions?
What do you think the biggest misconception students have is about this?
That's a good question. I mean, to some degree, I might ask these guys because well, the easy answer is when people hear portfolio review, they immediately think the projects they've done at community college or on the side, oh, I have to submit a portfolio of my work, where really it is a couple of projects from your graphic design classes here and some independent projects. So I feel like the word portfolio is a little misleading, and you're not just submitting oh, my 5 best pieces that I did, etc. What do you guys think? As far as what misconceptions about the portfolio?
I think definitely one thing is I had a couple people in my class who ended up having really good projects, but then they got too scared and they didn't submit one because they didn't want to face not getting in. And there are people that I totally thought would have gotten in if they submitted it. So I would say 100%, whether or not you think it's your best work, because like you said, you're always going to be very critical of your own work. You're never going to think your own work's the best. But 100% you should submit it.
Definitely, and keep in mind, if you submit it and you don't get in, which everybody hates rejection, it's a natural response. But then you can go to the instructors and find out, oh, what was strong about this? What was weak about this? How can I improve it? And you're not going to get that if you don't submit. Good question. Good.
Sorry, give me 1 second.
That's all right. No problem. Anything? Oh, so let me mention that if you guys want me to come back, I briefly talked about semiotics. Right? Semiotics is the study of signs. It's the understanding of meaning. And so I used to have a couple lectures on how do we communicate a message? What are the different ways that can be done, right? So for example, this might be obvious, but I want to communicate the idea of dog, right? I can show a picture of a dog, and as graphic designers, that's almost always our knee-jerk first reaction, right? But I could also put the word dog really big, D-O-G. That's another way to communicate the word idea of dog, right? But they have different things, right? I can only communicate the word dog to somebody who speaks English. I can communicate a picture of dog to anybody. But also, I could show a dog bowl. I could show a dog collar. I could show a paw print, right? So these are indirect ways of communicating, right? And if you approach your so this semiotics lecture goes into a little bit okay, some things you communicate, you're going to want to be straightforward and obvious, maybe the time of a meeting. But maybe other things like a graphic will be very abstract and undercoded in terms of it. And so that generates a certain kind of interest that if it was oh, that's obviously a picture of a dog. Where if it's a real close up of its nose, maybe that might be what the hell is that? And so thinking about, okay, this is what I'm trying to communicate. What are the different ways that can be done? Not forgetting that you can just use typography because there's a lot of interesting things you can do with the word letters, DOT, right? But also thinking about what things are related to dogs that in indirectly communicate dog, and then are those more interesting than this kind of like, because again, all of us, 90% of us, I said, okay, you have 5 minutes to design a logo for a dog walking company. 90% of them are going to look the same, because when we only have 5 minutes, our brains are all trained to communicate in a certain way. But if I gave you 3 weeks to do it, and then you spent some time brainstorming, you thought like, well, what are things related to dog? Maybe a paw print. Well, paw print communicates walking and dog at the same time. So maybe there's a way to take a paw print and communicate dog walkers. Maybe a combination of a paw print, sneaker print, or something like that. So the longer you think about, the more research you do, the longer you think about it, and the more you kind of have like these kind of like ways of dissecting it, the more like you come up with an original idea rather than the same idea like 9 other people. Think of it.
For the portfolio courses, is it just graphic design 25, 30, and photo 11/12, or is there another course?
So now it's just photo 12. Though taking photo 11, that will count, but we want everybody to take 12. Don't take 11 unless you already taken it, which is fine. But you don't have any projects from that class. So it's just a project from graphic design 25, a project from graphic design 30, and then it's one project that kind of split into like independent projects that we work on. And we're trying, we haven't come up with the official set for this year yet. In a perfect world, what we'd love to have is where even people that didn't take 25 and 30 can submit their portfolios, or somebody from ARC or Sac City could just submit some projects, and we could compare them all in a way that it was fair and equal. So we're always trying to figure out ways to reduce the amount of projects you have to do for 25 and 30. Like, for example, I can imagine if we really nailed it down, maybe it's just an independent project. Like we just say to everybody, here's the independent project, go do it. Here's the here are the kind of guidelines for it, and then judge everybody on that. And that way, if you've taken something like 25 somewhere else, we can give you credit for it. You can directly get into the major rather than having to take 25 and 30 here, which takes a year or something. But we haven't. Every year we look at the results and we look at like, oh, this person got in, and this is where they would rank. Looking at the entire portfolio, this is where they would rank. We just looked at GPA, for example. This is where they would rank. We just looked at the independent project. We just looked at 25. And we try to look at correlations to see like, oh, if we had just did the independent project, would we have ended up with the same 40 students, right? And so we're trying to get to a point where that might be the case. We haven't done the analysis from last year yet, but that's kind of our goal. So eventually we hope to get it to where it's just maybe an independent project and maybe one sign up 30 or something, but we're not quite there.
And then I had another question. When are portfolio guidelines released?
Generally, I think in late February, mid-February, late, somewhere along those lines. And then we try to give you, I'm trying to make sure I don't misspeak, because again, it's evolved over the years. We give you at least a month to do the independent project, and I think that usually includes spring break if you want to. Not that you have to take a spring break, but to do it. But you can spend some of your time if you wanted to on it. So usually you have at least 4 weeks to work on the independent project, and also time to think about, because it's usually combined with those specific words, and some time to think about that word, do some research on that word, think broadly about it. I can probably take one more question, and then I have to run. I have to go take care of it. But I'm happy to come back too. So if you guys like one round 2, that's fine. Yeah, for sure. Well, people with the graphic design into the career.
People with a graphic design degree, how many is it for them to get into UI UX person?
Yeah, I would. I would say that if I had to go percentage wise, I would say 2/3 probably get into a graphic design job. Maybe 1/3 of that. So we divide it up into thirds of graduating seniors. I would say 1/3 either not find a job or get a job at something else. Like a lot of students already have a job, they're kind of working on the side and they just decide to stay with that job. A third probably get a graphic design job, but it's kind of not the job they want. They have to put some time in doing some other stuff. And a third probably get the job they want, doing what they want at the time. And so I'm not sure that's any way scientific. And so, I did say, almost all of your job opportunities are come from the quality of your portfolio. But keep in mind, usually your grades are a good indication of how good your portfolio is. So it's the rare student that has a great portfolio and lousy grades. If you're doing well in your grades, then that's a good sign that you get the job you want. If you're kind of doing worse, then maybe you'll have to punch a little bit more. But to be completely fair again, there are people that have to work full-time jobs and go to school at the same time. So they might be great designers, but their portfolio, maybe they wouldn't normally get an A if they didn't have to work 40 hours a week. As a result, they get B, and their portfolio is still pretty strong when they do well. So it's that's one.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, but what's like the average grade point average, like the graphic design student? Like what's just the average GPA?
Of a graphic design major or
An applicant.
This is somewhat of a guess. I probably looked at it once or twice, but it's probably I hate to say because it's really. I had to guess it would be around a 3.2, something like that. But I could be really off base. All right, folks. Well, thank you for having me.
Let's give a round of applause. If they have any more questions following up, where can they find you, email you?
Yep, you can email me. You can find my email address on the Sac State design page, but it's pretty easy. My last name short. It's rpratt, RPRATT @csus.edu. So send me an email. Sign up for my office hours. Come by and chat with me if you'd like. Usually the beginning and in this semesters are really busy, and then nobody sees me and comes to visit me in the middle of the semester. So if you're in the middle of the semester, come by. So that's also when you guys are usually the busiest, and you're like, I'd like to come by, but I also have this homework due, and I'd rather get my homework done and then go get some dinner than stop by and say hi to Professor Pratt. And you can just call me Richard, by the way.
All right, cool. Thank you again. So all of us on Zoom, thank y'all for dropping in. Thank y'all for coming in person. If before you did not sign in, please sign in the sign-in sheet. But other than that, everyone else, have a great night. Thank y'all for coming. And bye. Okay.